Next, we come to a story that came to our attention towards the end of June, and in fact, actually has just rounded off on the day of recording today, on the 5th of July. And this is the sale of the controversial statue of King Tutankhamun, or King Tut, as people sometimes call him. That despite its what Live Science calls here sketchy origins, has this morning sold for this morning it is announced it's been sold for £4.7 million, despite protests from Egypt. What do you make of this story, and what should and could archaeologists be doing and thinking about this sort of issue?
Right. Well, first of all, most archaeologists have a rather negative relationship, perhaps, with the auction system, of which Christie's is one of the most important internationally. It's one of the great auction firms. As archaeologists, we're not supposed to talk about financial value and value objects and so on. We're not the Antiques Roadshow.
Well, and also, just briefly for people at home, there'll be some people who think that's part of a conspiracy. That's not mandated to us. That's just best practice.
Absolutely.
You must not. No, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
No. Yeah. There are archaeologists who work commercially for auction houses and for antiquities companies and so on, and legally they're perfectly entitled to do so. Many colleagues would take a rather dim view of it, but that's because of the long-standing arguments about that. What happened at Christie's is that a brown quartz head, which was identified as King Tutankhamun by the auction house, that people have again questioned this. But in terms of achieving a hammer price, a name like Tutankhamun will attract more bids and higher bids, it is thought, than a less well-known pharaoh, for example, or even an anonymous pharaoh, which some people have said this isn't actually. It's not a Tutankhamun at all. It's actually just an anonymous Middle Kingdom pharaoh.
Right. Okay.
So there's that question in the first place: was the name attached to it with complete academic rigor, or was it a useful label, knowing that it was coming up for sale?
Yes. Yeah.
There is then the question of where did it come from. The Egyptian government and the well-known former Antiquities Minister of Egypt, Zahi Hawass, alleged that it could have been taken from a temple at Karnak during the 1970s by artifact thieves. Christie said that they'd taken every necessary step to prove its provenance. The sale was legitimate. They said it, quote, it's a very well-known piece and it's never been the subject of a claim. Well, then he said, well, actually, it hadn't been that well publicised before. It's now up in a catalogue in a particular sale, and it's attracted attention. Christie's said that it came from their provenance is via a Munich antiquities dealer who acquired it in 1985. Who acquired it in turn from an Austrian dealer called Joseph Messina, who bought it in the early 1970s. And this is where we start getting very... the language starts to change. It was allegedly in the collection of Prince Wilhelm von Thurn und Taxis.
Reputedly.
Reputedly in the 1960s. Now, this is where it gets interesting, where it gets complicated, because Live Science did an investigation, and their investigation concluded that there was no evidence that Prince of Thurn and Taxis actually ever owned it at all. And in fact, members of his family said that he had no interest in antiquities or Egyptology. It is also the case that some of the antiquities dealers involved had also been involved in moving, shall we say, antiquities that weren't all that they appeared to be.
Mm.
Now, ultimately, the question is twofold, really. Is the artifact stolen, and is the artifact genuine? Problem is that there has been no objective investigation into either of those questions.
Well, you see, as you say that there are two questions. There are two associations quoted here: rare and beautiful. The rare and beautiful 3,000-year-old sculpture goes under the hammer in defiance of claims that it was stolen. And is that not partly really what we're seeing here? Is two completely disparate sets of priorities butting heads? The rareness and the beauty, and to a certain extent the provenance, because that adds to the value of the rareness and the beauty, and then the actual life pathway of the artifact, as defined historically and archaeologically. Now, as part of this segment, we've also linked in with another live science article. They're doing a particularly good job on reporting on these issues, it seems.
Yes.
In this instance, this is blood antiquities looted from war-torn Yemen, bring in $1 million at auction. It's worthwhile saying that this is $1 million over a period of time and various artifacts which have been sold. This isn't any single artifact. But again, it highlights that there is an issue here in terms of Christies may say we do all necessary steps to ensure legitimacy of the things that we sell. Who defines necessary? Presumably Christies. These people are on commission. It's worthwhile saying as well.
Yeah.
So it's never comfortable, and it looks as though it's not going away. I'm not going to say it's only going to get worse. It is what it is, but it's not going away.
There's another problem here, though. If in this particular case and also other cases like it, if there is a question over provenance and over whether an artifact is genuine or not, effectively the auction houses have a free run unless somebody, and it can be an individual, or it can be a government, like, for example, the Egyptian government. The Egyptian government could, if they'd had evidence that it was stolen or it was fake, then they could have taken out an injunction to stop the sale. They didn't. Now, I don't know why they didn't. It may be a policy thing. It may be a financial thing. We don't know. It could have been a rich Egyptian could have been handed the evidence and taken out an injunction and funded it as a patriotic gesture. So there's a certain element of bluff here. Every time a major Egyptian artifact comes up for sale at one of the auction houses, the Egyptian government protests and says it's cultural. We talked about cultural material earlier in connection with museums. It argues that there are very few Egyptian artifacts that were exported legally because Egypt had antiquities laws in place from the middle of the 19th century preventing exports.
Well, and as one protester outside Christie's apparently said, Ibrahim Radi, 69-year-old Egyptian graphic designer, we are against our heritage and valuable items being sold like vegetables and fruit. Yeah, and that's it.
Absolutely, and in fact, many of the people that were involved in the protest last night were also involved in the protest against the sale of Sekhem Kar in 2016, I think it was, by Northampton Council, widely condemned, and but the point is, until somebody challenges them legally on these issues, the multi-billion-pound arts auction industry, and that's what it is, it's an industry, will continue. Now, what's interesting about this one is that in the aftermath of the sale, 4.5 million quid sounds like a lot of money for 30 centimetres at 4.7 million quid, quite a lot of money for 30 centimetres of granite. Now, there has been a number of suggestions in social media from historians and Egyptologists that a number of things happened last night. That figure is pretty close to Christie's estimate. Now, Sekhem Kar went for 3 times the estimate. and there is a suggestion that the negative publicity actually drove down the price, and in fact, the person that sold the statue is really quite pissed off,
Right.
which
Yeah.
makes me feel very good if that's the case.
What? They only got 4.7 million.
Yeah,
Oh,
exactly. I suppose
poor guy.
the other thing is, and again, I'm not
Or
saying this
girl.
happens. I'm not saying this happened in this case. There is no evidence that anybody has done anything illegal in this case at the moment.
No.
Um, but there have been suggestions, and we saw it in the Panama Papers, for example, that the price of art was being driven artificially high as a way of laundering money
Yeah. Yeah.
or storing money.
Yeah. So there are attendant alleged potential issues surrounding the sale of such artifacts. We're
Absolutely.
not saying that this one was, but
No.
what's it? But I suppose with that in mind, it's also worthwhile just briefly just going back to this idea of being sold like fruit and veg. Ironically, if you can afford to sell something, or indeed if you sell something that's worth the better part of £5 million, you're going to care greatly about the provenance of the food on your plate. You're going to eat organic. You're probably going to, to frequent expensive and fancy restaurants and all that sort of stuff. You want to know that what you're eating is high quality, i.e., not horse meat being sold as beef in a TV ready meal or whatever. It is ironic, though, that with these artifacts being sold like lumps of any other commodity, that actually one of the elements that surrounds them is people not wanting to know too much about the provenance of these artifacts.
Yeah.
And I think that's revealing, and it's something which I've definitely noticed in smaller establishments of antique stores and this kind of thing, and places where metal and small finds turn up from, say, the Mediterranean. No one wants to know too much, just enough to know that it's, as I say, rare and beautiful and old. And I think that's a real shame.
Yeah. I mean, there is a whole gamut of sale of cultural historical material, ranging from things that have legitimately been in the public domain for many, many years and have a secure provenance, and however distasteful some people might find the sale of that kind of material into private hands, it's perfectly legal. Through to material that is deliberately trafficked by professional traffickers, and stuff that's brought back casually by holiday makers or whatever who've found it or bought it and don't say that it, there was the case recently of the gentleman in Turkey who was snorkeling and recovered a collection of coins which were then spotted as he was trying to leave the country, and I think we covered that on Watching Brief. It's and there is a market for it. And particularly, high-end Egyptian antiquities. There are various museums that are being built in the Middle East at the moment, in places like Qatar, where they are being stocked from auctions and private and dealers, because they're being started from scratch. Again, the most famous example is the Salvatore Mundi, the alleged Leonardo da Vinci, which may not even be a Leonardo, or if it is, it's very heavily restored, or it might be absolutely genuine. There's a huge controversy about it. And when it was last seen sailing around the Gulf in a Saudi prince's yacht, I understand, or a prince's yacht. So, I think the thing about Christie's and provenance and the detail, there was a very detailed catalogue entry for that object. It looked absolutely secure. But the moment Live Science interrogated what Christie's experts writing that catalogue had said, it started to look a lot less secure. And I think we're back in the where we are with commercial archaeology. When you write a desktop study for a developer, there is a lot of pressure to write what the developer wants, which is something that's not going to cause problems at the planning committee. Christie's want their buyers and sellers premium, so they want to sell the object and they want to sell it for as much as possible.
Yeah.
And you could argue that's legitimate business, but it does leave them, I think, open to exploitation by others, and maybe there is a pressure on them not to ask too many questions, or not to accept that there are questions that need to be answered.
Indeed, indeed.